Whenever I see a scary thread, it ends up being about ghosts and whatnot. That's not scary. I find real people more strange and eerie than the paranormal. What are your scariest encounters with real people? I'm so happy this question was asked. This is the only good story in my whole life. Growing up, I always wanted to go on a bike ride at night. Something about it seemed really cool to me. It wasn't until I was 13 that my mom finally let me. She told me to wear my helmet, have my phone, take a flashlight, and she set the parameters for where I was allowed to go. She gave me about 4 miles, which was a lot to me. So right after the sun set, I was off. I loved it. There were no people out walking their dogs, no kids running around, the temperature was perfect, etc. It was really fun, so fun, that I ignored the limits my mom set. You see, where I was biking was all walking paths. It was one of those grassy areas between two neighborhoods. There's this long path that went at least 600 feet at a 25-degree angle. I was flying down this hill, having an absolute blast, and darted right through the parameters. My mom set these limits for a reason. Everything on the inside was close to houses and people. The outside, more specifically, the place where the path I was on led to, was barren. I rode along this path for 10 minutes before I could only see some of the lights of the houses on the inside of the limits. After 15 minutes of riding along this dirt path, I hear singing. It sounded about 30 to 40 feet in front of me. I stop riding to hear it better. It was a woman's voice. She was singing Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. But she wasn't singing the words, just the melody of the vocals. Her voice was strange. You know how when you have phlegm in your throat, your voice gets scratchy? That's what her voice sounded like. I inch forward to try and see her. I get close enough to see the silhouette of hair bouncing up and down, like she was head-banging. I decide to get my flashlight out. I'm thinking that maybe this person is in need of help or something. Or maybe this is an insane person and the light will scare them away. So I take the flashlight out of my pocket, point it at her, and turn it on. The moment the light hit her, she stopped moving completely. She was facing away from me. She had disgusting hair that seemed to be sticking together in clumps. Some of her hair was ripped off, too. She was wearing a very oversized, bright red hoodie. I was almost too scared to move. I think she was, too. I conjured up as much bravery as I could and said sorry in a very, oops, this is the wrong room, kind of way. She didn't respond. I turned off the flashlight and put it back in my pocket. Just as I was turning my bike around, she screams. She screams in an awful, high-pitched voice. I damn near shit myself as I throw myself back onto my bike. I hear her voice getting closer to me. I book it as fast as I can. I don't look behind me, and I don't stop pedaling. Her screaming grew quieter and quieter until it dissolved into the howling of the wind. TLDR went on a bike ride at 13, heard someone singing Eleanor Rigby in the darkness, shine a flashlight on her, she freezes, turn it off, she screams and runs at me as I bike away. This story is 100% true. I experienced it myself in the summer of 1991. When I was about 10 years old, I lived on Woodway Drive in the Fox Harbor Apartments in Paducah, Kentucky. If you look up the address, you will see some woods just to the north of the apartment complex. My friends and I played in those woods every day after school and all day on the weekends. Through the few years I lived there, we cleared a small area in the woods and created a fort from various things we got out of dumpsters. It was our own place that no one else knew about, and it was awesome. One day as we were walking to our fort, off in the distance we saw a man walking through the woods. He was walking parallel to us, but in the opposite direction like cars traveling on a road, but with about 70 to 80 yards separating our paths. We stopped talking and stopped dead in our tracks when we saw him. We never saw anyone in the woods, especially not adults. When we stopped moving, he did too. He turned towards us and looked right at us. As I stared at him and was able to make out the details of what he looked like, I noticed that he was wearing what looked like a Halloween mask, a generic mask, not Michael Myers, and carrying an axe in his hands. We stood there in silence and motionless for what was probably about 10 seconds, he looking at us, and us looking at him. He started sprinting straight at us. We did the only thing we apparently thought to do, run straight to our fort. We were probably about 50 yards from the entrance to the fort, and in those 50 yards he gained a lot of ground on us. When we finally made it, he was upon us. All of my friends scurried up a tree and were screaming, but I was the last in line. By the time I could try and climb the tree, he was standing right there by us. He was screaming like a lunatic and waving the axe in the air. I was scared, had no idea what was going on, and my mind was blank on what I should do. I grabbed a large stick and took a nice big baseball bat swing and cracked him on the face with it. He stumbled back a bit, moaned and took the mask off. I recognized the face. It was the landlord and manager of the apartment complex. A man who was probably about 50 years old. He wanted to play a joke on us and thought this was the most appropriate thing to do. He was a fucking psycho. TLDR was chased by a man with a mask and an axe through the woods. I fought back. It was all a joke that we didn't find funny. Well, I hope the bitch was real. In Toronto there is a subway system run by the TTC or Toronto Transit Commission. They often square off certain parts of the subway route, which is pretty fucking basic, in order to do some upgrades or fix bits. Lately they've been shutting down the subway rides into downtown on the weekends. Anyway, they were doing some upgrades on the track and we were going by pretty slow, making sure not to run over anyone while they scampered out of the way. Out of nowhere the power cut out. Now, I should say that I wasn't the only one in the train car. The cars are decently long and I was at one end, and some woman was at the other end. When I walked onto the train it was up at her end where there was a giant bubble of seats empty around her. She was displaying the typical signs of batshit crazy and people sort of avoided her. Everyone else was off, getting off at Yonge, but I still had another couple stops east to go. She was laughing, audibly, and I tried to tune it out by listening to some music but it never really worked. It was so chilling that my brain sort of just kept ignoring the music and focusing on her, so eventually I just unplugged the music and sat back, trying not to shit my pants. So anyway, the power cuts out and here I am sitting at one end, as far away from her as I could possibly be, and the lights turn off for some reason. She stopped laughing. In fact, she stopped making any noise at all. When the lights came back on about 5 seconds later when I had sufficiently shit my pants, she wasn't at the far end. She was about 3 seats away from me, staring at me. The second the train stopped I bolted for the fucking door. After she relocated she didn't make another sound, she just kept staring. Fucking creepiest moment of my goddamn life. If you would like your story featured in my video let me know. Please like, comment, and subscribe.